Welcome to the Empowering Industry Podcast, a production from Empowering Pumps and Equipment as the voice of the pump and related equipment industry. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Empowering Industry Podcast. I'm your host, Charli Matthews, and I'm here. I'm in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It's a beautiful day. I know y'all can't see that, but I'm just happy. It's May. We're having a good time. Looking forward to going to Houston for Valve World Americas. That's coming up in June. We're really excited to be here, and I have a special guest today. Bronson, if you will just go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience here.
Well, thank you, Miss Charli. It's great to be a part of your show, and I'm excited to see you at Valve World. And the weather's finally nice up here in Montana. We've actually started to thaw, so it's kind of a win.
Yes. Well, Bronson, tell people kind of what's your current job situation? Like, what are you doing for the industry? And then we'll kind of dive into your background a little bit.
Yeah, so in my previous past, I've been working heavily as an environmental consultant, kind of one of the leaders in fugitive emission reductions. And back at Valve World in Dusseldorf, I started to really heavily talk with a couple folks, especially Tedded and MagDrive, and I got recruited to actually work a little bit more local. And so I'm the director of global fugitive emissions, I believe is my title now at MagDrive. And they're located here in Bozeman, Montana, where it's quite nice to go to an office every day and see people, especially after COVID, where we've been very heavily remote. And so, and then I started also at the same time working with Tedded as their lead for environmental consulting. So I'm kind of helping them understand more how to talk to the environmental folks versus just the mechanical folks.
Yeah. And I think that's how I see you, like, over the years, that I love the conversation about the environment, what we can do as industry people and the equipment manufacturers specifically, what they can do to reduce the fugitive emissions, right? There's a difference between like overall emissions and fugitive emissions. That's something that we can actually work on. So, what brought you into this industry?
Well, so a lot of times, I mean, I've known you for basically most of my career. I used to start all of my keynotes or introductions with a lot of folks that I grew up in the industry. So my grandfather built gas plants all over the country, and him and a partner would go find them and build them up and then sell them off to like Kinder Morgan or Anadarko or things like that after they ran them for a few years. And then my father was an operator and then moved into being the manager for a refinery in Wyoming. And then he moved up and took over both plants. And so I kind of was just born and raised going there. My first job was being the yard boy at the refinery. So I'd mow yard. And then, my father was a single parent. And so when he was the head of the rescue team and things like that. And so when they had incidents, I would go out there and I'd actually help with call out when I was a little kid, when there was an explosion or things like that. And so it was just kind of one of those paths that my father and grandfather told me never to get into this space, but I really didn't have a choice. And so with that, it was kind of more, what did I want to do? And I knew I didn't want to work heavily as an industry person because I wanted to be able to see the world and travel and do that kind of thing. And so with that, I headed into the consulting side.
Yeah. And I think that love for the like environment, and just being in that atmosphere, if you will, and seeing, okay, how can I add value to this? What can I do to yes, experience life and move about. I'm kind of one of those adventure people too. I love to travel and see new things and staying in the same location even. In the same town, that didn't appeal to me. And so I had to have a job that allowed me to travel, similar to you, right? So, but but these are your contacts. These are your, you grew up with these people. They surrounded you. And I think you found a great way to influence the market and help the industry with this very, I mean, it's a hard conversation, right? It's like, I mean, I'll let you talk about it because you're more skilled in this, but how do you go in and say, let's look at your emissions? Like, what does that look like?
Well, so I mean, it's kind of taken two different approaches. And sorry for the puppy. I don't know how to make her quiet at this moment. But it's really two different approaches that took place. And one is in the United States, we were heavily regulated. And so, it started back in the 70s. Well, it really started back in the 50s, but then our regulations started coming into play more in the 70s and 80s, and we started seeing reductions. So the conversation within the US is a lot easier when it comes to how to go in and have the conversation from an environmental aspect, because we have rules that are forcing us to do it. But when you're looking at it from a global aspect, it has to be a little bit different of a thought because it's not as regulated. Yes, people always want to make the right decision, but is that right decision due more to a monetary value, or is it to, helping the earth? Because I was talking with one of my closest friends, fathers, figures, Tim Gedeker, who just retired from Phillips. And we were working on trying to co-author a paper for Valve World. And we were trying to figure out how to tie in the net 50, 2050 goal of net zero to, true product and mechanical and those experiences. And one thing that kind of resonated with me was, the air that we're breathing is not just our air. This air has moved around in the jet stream and it could be coming from anywhere. So the impact that we make, if it's in China or if it's in Nigeria or if it's in South America, it could all be coming around. And so when you go into those foreign countries, you kind of have to have a two-piece approach. One is how can I help you, but how can I make it cost effective? Where in the US, we do it more of here's the rule. And so how do I stay in compliance so that I don't have to get fined or pay and get in trouble and then make it public?
Yeah. And there's a lot of that is good. There's a lot of regulations that are good, and there's a lot of voluntary action that is good. And so if we can combine some of that in some other regions, I think is, leading by example. I don't know what's best. I don't even pretend to, but I do know that we have some great experts that are talking to each other, and they're getting together and, having these conversations about how to make the industry better. And I think that's definitely a testament to what you and Tim were doing. So with that, like I've seen you and kind of I've followed the papers. I've watched your career kind of change and grow. But you've always been kind of part of Valve World, for me, and part of the steering committee is where I know you're part of that this year. But what does that look like? How, the setting and connecting with these like minds to get ready for a conference?
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of answer the first part of your question, being a part of the steering committee is something that I worked really hard to get into. When I came into this scene, I was very young. I think the very first time that I presented, I was 24 at Valve World Dusseldorf. And so, when you don't have the gray hair to kind of look at it and some of the wrinkles, people are like, why are we listening to these little punk kids talking to us? We've been doing this for 30 or 40 years, we know. But I got really in with Mr. Andre and Miss Sarah, and what I saw, especially in my career, is, through regulations, we're trying to achieve the lowest amount of emissions. But why would we keep trying to use the things that we've always used. So by being a part of the steering committee, it's helped me, meet some of the biggest players within the manufacturing space, or OEMs. Everybody uses different terminology, but being able to, talk with those folks and understand what products out there, and from an environmental aspect, nobody had any idea that API existed. Nobody knew that ASME existed or ISO. It's, well, I got to go buy this. Well, what am I buying? Nobody knew. And so by being able to be a part of the steering committee and being a part of Valve World has truly helped bridge that gap, where there's such a value that the manufacturers have, and it's just being able to communicate it to the right folks in the right terminology that others have. So, people talk about learning a language. You got to learn how to speak Mandarin if you're going to go to China. Well, you have to put in that effort, because manufacturers and industry folks speak two totally different languages. And so you have to have somebody that can help bridge that gap. And I think Valve World has very strategically, over the years since, my first time, we've started to truly show how to bridge that gap, not just domestically here in the US, but also globally, of how to help make a bigger impact and have everybody in the room at the same time.
That's such great advice too, just to get involved. These young people coming into the industry, it is intimidating, and so I think getting on different association boards and committees and events, and getting out there and learning the industry through talking to people. I think that that language. I mean, part of the acronyms that come up, I'm like, okay, hold on, you're using this in a different way. So, never be afraid to ask which acronym this actually is in a meeting,
Yeah.
because everybody has a different one. And so, I think that being a part of this, being a part of Valve World Americas and Valve World Dusseldorf, I've gotten to attend Valve World Dusseldorf, which is a great experience, and seeing the vastness of the industry was exceptional. But, excited that it's in Houston, kind of the energy corridor of the U.S., and you'll be there speaking. What is your talk on?
So the first thing I'm doing is I'm teaching the same course I normally do with a whole bunch of updates. So the first, I think it's on Tuesday or Wednesday of before the show, I'm doing the history of fugitive emissions. Gobind Kiani's going to co-teach that with me this year, because we wanted to help actually show a little bit more about the Canadian regulations and some of the global regulations that are having impacts to the supply chain up north of, the US, along with kind of the traditional thing of how to, talk to everybody, how to make it consistent, things like that. But then I was asked to give a keynote on the EPA and updating of regulations and how it's moving us forward more into the environmental justice space. So, kind of trying to connect all those dots. And right now, we're talking with a couple of the folks from EPA and NEIC to hopefully co-present or add more of their side to that presentation, as part of the keynote, because I believe it's supposed to be about 45 minutes to an hour. So we're hoping kind of to meld that between two folks. So me kind of more helping industry, where we can also hear more from the enforcement or what's coming down the pipe side, so that, our manufacturers really can start to think about how we're going to take our technology to that next level.
Yeah, and just I'm just really curious, like kind of interacting with the EPA and having conversations with them. Is that kind of part of the regular job that you're doing now, or is it more like consulting the manufacturers that they need to do that?
No, so part of my main job right now is to take a new technology to actual, getting it adopted within our industry, because as we talked earlier, we're really slow to adopt new technologies. we like the old trusted way of things. And, if we're truly going to make an impact, we got to have technology as our friend, just like we're doing this podcast right now through computers, and I'm in Montana and you're in Alabama. So, technology has taken us to that next step where we can make things happen a lot faster and a lot easier. And so, part of my role right now is introducing a zero emission valve to the market. But my other part of my role, or it's always been part of my role, is really trying to be that middleman between the agencies and the end users. So understanding their thought process and what's going to be coming, and how can we preemptively get ahead of that, to how do you talk with industry when they're potentially going to push back. So being a part and being that middleman for industry to put out comments to new rules, and putting those out where you're kind of advocating for them without them getting their name out there. So you're helping bridge that gap to communicate where it doesn't just throw a limelight at one person or one manufacturer.
I love that. And I think if y'all haven't noticed, like y'all need to pay attention and get to know Bronson. So if you haven't met him, it sounds like you need to take a flight to Houston in June to do that. If you're in this industry and you're really trying to connect with people, I've always thought that you are very approachable. So I just give people that advice. If you can get there to these events and connect with leaders, it's just so valuable. So Bronson, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I just would hope everybody tries to come to Valve World this year. There's been some changes, where we're having some really good keynotes. We've added some additional trainings where there's going to be a lot more interaction this time than in the past. And, after COVID, it's going to be one of the first big conferences that everybody's finally there and willing to go to, where travel budgets have opened again and whatnot. So I just hope to see everybody there. I know I'll see you there, so we'll definitely catch up and maybe have a glass of wine or something like that. But
absolutely, I'm excited because we are going to be there. There's a panel for empowering women in the workforce, which I love. But it definitely during the networking hour part, y'all come over. Men are welcome. We absolutely need each other in this. And so that's the whole point, is showing what, women can do in the industry as well. I'm really excited to see everybody. Y'all, I will put all the information in the show notes. Bronson, I want to do a quick rapid fire, if you don't mind. I always ask a couple questions. What is your favorite book?
My favorite book, gosh, I wouldn't even know. Probably, I don't know, The Hobbit was fun.
Awesome. And then what about music? Do you have a favorite song or band?
Jack Johnson is
I
definitely.
love Jack Johnson.
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then what is the best advice that you've ever received?
No, it's probably never be afraid to trust yourself.
I like that. And so the very close second question to that is, what advice would you give a young person coming into this industry?
Don't be intimidated. Just make sure that you come and you try and you keep trying, because it will be noticed.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time, Bronson. It was great to catch up with you. I feel like I learned a little bit more about you too. Things probably I forgot from 20 years ago or something like that.
Long time.
Yes. Well, wonderful to see you. And I just thank you for being on the podcast, and y'all share this episode. I think, this is Bronson's first podcast, so we'll need to encourage him to get on more, because this is how we're doing it these days, right? Digital podcasts.
It is. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you soon.